Ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to talk about two of the fastest men who ever lived, test pilots from the great state of West Virginia, Chuck Yeager and Pete Everest. So some of you who know a lot about aviation history might know Brigadier General Charles Elwood Yeager, aka Chuck Yeager, the first man to break the sound barrier, but you might not be familiar with Brigadier General Frank Kendall Everest Jr., aka Pete Everest, a man who really pioneered a lot of the technology that made that accomplishment possible. So we're going to talk about the two of them here today, and it's really hard to talk about their test pilot days if we don't go all the way back to their early days of piloting in World War II. One guy has the last name Yeager, the other one has the last name Everest. Those are some really cool last names. Those are main character last names. Kids, do everything in your power to have a really cool last name. That's all I can say. So Pete Everest was born in Fairmont, West Virginia in 1920, and from a very young age he wanted to be a pilot. Like, he would base major life choices like what he went to college for, he would make those decisions based entirely on wanting to be a pilot. He studied for 1 year at Fairmont State College before he went to West Virginia University in Morgantown to study engineering. And then in 1941, he would go to the United States Army Air Force's Aviation Cadet pilot training, where he would graduate in 1942. Again, he did all this even before World War II was declared because, again, his entire childhood he wanted to be a pilot. Now, similar and humble origins, Chuck Yeager was born in 1923 in Myra, West Virginia. This is near Hamlin, again, in the very southern part of the state. After graduating from high school in 1941, Chuck would join the Army Air Corps as an airplane mechanic. See, at the time, he was too young and he didn't have any college education, so he wasn't allowed to be a pilot. But then Pearl Harbor happened and the United States needed every single pilot that they could get, so he was accepted into the Flying Sergeant program. Chuck Yeager had 10/20 vision. That means he could see from 20 feet away what someone with 20/20 vision could only see from 10 feet away. Chuck Yeager had literal superpowers, and they were going to put him behind the controls of a flying machine gun nest. In fact, growing up during the Great Depression and being the second of 5 children, like a lot of people during the Great Depression, Appalachians subsidized their diets with venison, stuff they could hunt in the woods of West Virginia, and he would later comment that he regularly made shots from 3, 4, even at one point 600 yards away, which is impressive, okay? We're talking about with iron sights, not scopes. Again, this is pre-World War II, so that is super impressive. So Chuck found himself in Britain during the early days of World War II, where he would fly 7 missions and have 1 air-to-air kill, but on his 8th mission he was shot down over the French countryside. Luckily, he was able to hide in a barn where he came in contact with the French resistance. Yeager would spend several weeks working with the resistance, helping them build bombs, something he would later on say he learned from his father. Fun fact, Chuck Yeager was from Lincoln County, West Virginia, which borders both Logan and Mingo counties, so there's a fair chance, like a greater than 0% chance, that Chuck Yeager's father, if he was a coal miner, might have taken part in either the Tug River Valley strikes or the Paint and Cabin Creek strikes, which means that math about building bombs adds up But eventually Chuck Yeager wanted to take back to the skies, so he would scale the Pyrenees Mountains and escape occupied France through Spain, and then eventually make his way back to Britain. So Chuck shows back up at his Air Force base, ready to take back to the skies, but because of a rule concerning pilots who had been shot down behind enemy lines, he was permanently grounded. And this greatly upset Chuck. I mean, he left a perfectly good bomb-making career to come all the way back over here just to find out that he was permanently grounded. And he would protest this rule all the way up the chain of command until at one point a high-ranking official actually heard his protest, and yeah, the commander that actually listened to Chuck Yeager was none other than Dwight Eisenhower. Chuck Yeager would later on to say, quote, "I raised so much hell that General Eisenhower finally let me go back to my squadron." Eisenhower said that he would let Yeager eventually take back up to the skies, but not until the ground invasion of France. This was because the United States really didn't have any foothold at all in France at the time. This was pre-D-Day invasion, so if D-Day was a success, there would be soldiers on the ground that the downed pilots would be able to make their way back to. But if D-Day was a failure, Eisenhower would have a lot more on his plate than a couple upset pilots. So this was like a 4D big brain chess move by Eisenhower, and yeah, it paid off. After D-Day, Yeager was allowed to go back up in the skies. So Chuck was able to go back to flying again, and he immediately went back to work. He shot down a Ju-88 bomber over the English Channel. He made the achievement of ace in a day. This means he shot down 5 enemy aircrafts in one mission, 2 of which he didn't have to fire a single shot to accomplish. He dropped down into position to begin opening up fire on a German plane, at which point it banked super hard, crashing into its wingman, downing both planes, which is... And he also got one of the first air-to-air kills of a German jet fighter, which is super impressive. That's like a stock 2006 Honda Civic beating a souped-up Porsche in a drag race. Like, it's not impossible, boy, is it impressive. Now, Pete Everest, on the other hand, during World War II, he would serve in North Africa. Of course, since he had gone through college and all that, he didn't have to jump through all the hurdles to become a pilot like Chuck Yeager did. And if you're not familiar with the North Africa theater during World War II, think Catch-22 if you ever read that book or watched the movie or the TV show. In North Africa, Everest would fly over 90 missions and he would shoot down 2 German transport planes. For his service, he was moved back stateside and assigned to a fighter squadron as an instructor in Florida. And a lot of people would see this as a fairly cushy position. I mean, he was in Florida, he could take in the sun, he could take in the sand, he could maybe play some golf on the weekends. No, he immediately requested to be sent back into combat, and with the war in Europe slowly winding down, he was sent to the Eastern Front, the Chinese mainland, in order to teach pilots there in case there was an all-out invasion of the main Isle of Japan. There, he would fly an additional 67 missions, and then on the 68th, his plane would be shot down and he would be captured by the Japanese in May 1945. After being held and tortured as a prisoner of war for months, the war ended and Everest was returned to the United States. And after all that, you might be thinking, a normal person would never even want to look at an airplane again. Well, that's why we're not talking about just any ordinary person. We're talking about Pete Everest, because because he was then stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base outside of Dayton, Ohio as a test pilot. Right around the same time, Chuck Yeager was allowed to become a test pilot, even though he didn't have a college education, which is a pretty big deal. Chuck Yeager was stationed at the Muroc Army Airfield in California and was selected to test the Bell X-1, a U.S. experimental rocket plane. The day before the flight, Chuck Yeager had fallen off of a horse and had injured his ribs. He had actually gotten a off-base doctor to tape him up, and he told no one in his chain of command about these injuries. With taped ribs and all, he got into the Bell X that was strapped to the bottom of a bomber, and he had to use an old broom handle to close the hatch. He was in so much pain. When the bomber hit altitude over the Rogers Dry Lake of the Mojave Desert, Yeager detached, fired the rockets, and hit a speed of Mach 1.01, aka 662 miles per hour. This absolutely shattered the sound barrier at that altitude, and he became the fastest man alive. And this was an absolutely amazing feat, but a lot of the technology that was used in that mission came from Dayton, Ohio, came from the same air projects that Pete Everest was working on. See, when you take a West Virginia boy like Pete Everest and you stick him in Ohio and give him a lot of experimental aircrafts, he's going to do one thing and one thing only. Every single thing in his power to get out of Ohio as quickly as possible. He unofficially broke all types of records, which this being the height of the Cold War, I know a lot of people might look at it and go, well, he didn't officially break records. Yeah, there were probably a lot of records he was breaking that some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. looked at and went, yeah, we don't want the Soviets to know about this, so they never signed off on it. But if a bunch of experimental pilots all agree that he broke these records, yeah, I'm going to trust their opinion more than just some pencil pusher. Like, a movie about these test pilots in Dayton would be a mix between Top Gun and Talladega Nights. Like, safety features? No. They add weight. Weight means slow. They're here to go fast. Everest would work on the X-1, the X-2, the X-3, the X-4, the X-5, the XF-92, basically all the X's. The YB-52, the F-88, the F-105, but it was the F-100A, the 8 years after Yeager's achievement. Everest paid him back by beating his speed record by going at an astounding 755 miles per hour. This shattered all airspeed records previously set. And this made Everest the fastest man alive. And it's crazy to think that there was a little time period where two of the absolute fastest men who ever lived were both from the Mountain State. Two mountaineers whose love of aviation and addiction to adrenaline changed aerospace technology and history forever. Again, I have no idea why there isn't a movie about this, but also then again, I don't think modern Hollywood would know a good script if it landed on their desk at Mach 1. So in conclusion, that was the story of Chuck Yeager and Pete Everest, two of the fastest men who ever lived. One made famous for breaking the sound barrier, the other one made it all possible, and yeah, it's crazy to think that both of them came from right here in West Virginia. If you like this video, you might want to check out some of the other ones I've done. I do West Virginia history and travel videos from all across the Mountain State. Subscribe if you haven't yet. If there's any stories you would like to see me cover, let me know down in the comments. But until next time, don't forget to stay wild, stay wonderful, go fast, and I'll talk to you later.